But we're controlled by a very subtle system, which I've sort of realized. They keep you frightened. Used to be the Kaiser, then it was Hitler, then it was Stalin, now it's the Muslims, and you wait and see in a year or two, it'll be the Chinese. There'll be an MI5 man in every Chinese takeaway in case there's one. They keep you frightened. They keep you divided, men, women, black, white, Muslims, Christians, and so on. They keep you demoralized. I'll give you a very interesting example of that. I went to the Labour conference 2.5 years ago, and I heard Tony Blair's speech, got up to go to the loo and collapsed. Was taken to the hospital and given what somebody said to me afterwards must have been a peacemaker. And the reason I tell the story is, when I came out of that hospital, I discovered that it was the worst hospital in Britain in the Ministry of Health League tables. Now, what do you make of a sister? Well, how would you manage if you were a doctor, a surgeon, a sister in the worst hospital in Britain? And that's what the 11 plus is all about. I meet people in their 50s, what have you done? Well, Tony, I've failed the 11 plus. As if somehow the state had decided you were a failure for life. And also, the last thing you do is try and make you cynical. They're all a lot of bunch of crooks. And I think that is a mechanism. If you're not frightened, not divided, not demoralized, and not cynical, then you've got a chance of doing things. And that's the basis on which all progress, because all progress begins at the bottom. You know, you start with a ridiculous idea like votes for women. And the Prime Minister said if women got the vote, it would undermine parliamentary democracy. 7 years later, they got it. And all progress begins at the bottom and finally permeates through to the top. Progress, you begin by ignoring it, then if you go on, they're mad, I've had a lot of that, then you're dangerous, I had a touch of that, then there's a pause, and you can't find anyone at the top who doesn't claim to have thought of it in the first place. That is how progress is made, and that's why I end up in my life, not quite yet, I'm only 83 tomorrow, but with an optimist. I'm more optimistic than I've ever been. I think the public and the world and the new generation are a really remarkable group. My 10 grandchildren, you know, they 2 little granddaughters of mine in a primary school with 77 nationalities in a refugee centre in the school. And when I go and talk to them, I feel as if I'm addressing the General Assembly of the UN, and they understand the world. They know the choice is, do you blow the world up or use the money to develop for the future? And that, I think, is, that's why I am cheerful and optimistic, because hope is the fuel of progress, and fear is a prison into which you put yourself.
I don't know if anybody would like to ask some questions.
That works. Alastair, you said before that there were bits of the diary you thought long and hard before you decided to include or exclude Princess Diana.
I didn't think that long about that.
For a bit.
Yeah.
One of the things that you were very clear on that you decided to exclude at the time was bits of the Blair-Brown relationship. Do you look back 18 months on, 24 months on, I'm not sure, and think, maybe I ought to have delayed, because if I would have done it all now in an unexpurgated form, then the dust would have settled, no one would have cared, and it would have been a full and frank, complete diary in a way in which, as you said at the time, it wasn't quite.
No, I don't, because I think that it was a really difficult one, this, because when I was transcribing the diaries, as I was transcribing them, I was thinking, actually, well, I probably won't publish anything until Labour's no longer around, which is a pretty horrible thought. I don't kind of like that thought anyway. I've never really gone for this pendulum theory of politics that you have the Tories it's basically a Tory country, and occasionally have Labour government punctuating them, and then they go out again and the Tories come in all refreshed. I've never gone for that. And then I thought, well, I've got this material here. Obviously, there's an element in which, as we become, as it were, figures of history, Tony in particular, I was thinking of, that the interest will lessen a little bit. I mean, there'll be a sort of historical record there, but actually I did want it to be something that lots of people would kind of absorb and be interested in and have discussion around. So I took this decision to do something, and then I thought, well, I just thought there's no point denying there haven't been times when the Blair-Brown relationship was not great, and certainly wasn't as good as it should have been, and there were things said that, put down in print would give our opponents a field day. And I just thought the best thing I could do was be open about that, be open about the fact that that did happen, and which is hardly a great secret because there have been so many other books written about it anyway, and say that one day I'm going to publish the whole thing in full, but understand that from the privileged perspective I had, that one thing I really do understand is how hard it is to be Prime Minister. having seen very close up how Tony did it, and I think did it extremely well. So Gordon comes along, and whatever differences I might have had with Gordon, I go back a long, long way with Gordon Brown, much further than I do with Tony actually, that I wouldn't do anything that would damage him or that would give our opponents something with which they thought they could damage. And again, I say in the introduction to the paper, I don't know if I should be talking about the paper because it's not out till May, but I say in the introduction that I was really pleased that the first Prime Minister's questions after my book was published, and when it was published there was, ridiculous amount of coverage. Like I say, the Today programme, Humphrey's told me it was the longest interview he'd ever done on the Today programme. And so all this coverage got to the first PMQs and it wasn't raised. And I tell you, I could tell the publicists, the publishers were probably a bit, they thought it was going to be a big sort of hoo-ha. I was so happy with that because what it said to me is I published the thing and the Tories and the Liberals have gone through it with a fine-tooth comb and they've decided actually there's nothing they can really do to damage Gordon. And it's interesting, you see, there's lots in there. If you read it from the perspective that Tony Blair is still Prime Minister, there's loads and loads and loads of stuff in there that, were he still Prime Minister, it would be used to damage him, and it therefore might damage him. But actually, because he's no longer Prime Minister, it kind of is less important. So I'm glad I took the decision I took, I'm confident that in the fullness of time I'll be able to put a version out there that will be a fuller picture.
I don't think truth damages, you see. What damages relations is malice and rumour and gossip. But I can't imagine a cabinet I attended where if the minutes had been published the next day, it would have done a lot of harm. Because the one thing that is ludicrous, and nobody believes it, is the cabinet is unanimous on everything. Of course it isn't unanimous. And the pretense that it is, mind you, cabinets in the old days went on a bit longer than they do now. In January 1968, there were 8 full-day meetings of the cabinet, morning and afternoon. And we voted. We once defeated Harold Wilson in a vote in the cabinet. I can't imagine that happening now, but I won't go into that. But
certainly
the fact is, but the fact is there was real debate. And I don't think debate does damage. I published the other day my diaries for the debate in the cabinet when we decided as a cabinet to support the yes in the referendum of 75. The official minutes have been published, and cabinet minutes, because it's after 30 years, and mine were, and I submitted them both to a select committee, and they both say the same thing, but mine's a bit more interesting. Instead of the cabinet minutes say on the one hand it was argued, on the other hand it was suggested, I said Tony said this, Barbara said this, Dick said that, and I think we're much too sensitive about information, because if people know there's a debate going on about issues they care about, it restores their confidence in government. If they think that all these wooden ministers are all unanimous about everything, it isn't altogether credible.
But I think, Tony, I think that during that period, the reason I think there were these incredibly long cabinet meetings were because there were genuine fundamental divisions over the direction for the Labour Party and for the government and for the country. I don't think we should sort of sit around and say, let's bring back days where the Labour Party is fundamentally divided over big issues. No, you can have a debate without fundamental division. And again, I'm not convinced that 8-day cabinet meetings equals necessarily effective government. I really don't believe that at all.
No, but what it does do is, you see, this is where Jim Callaghan was so fair. Take the IMF discussions in 76. 4,000 words for a single cabinet. I checked in my diary this morning. You heard a debate. You could put different points of view.
Why did you check that particular point this morning?
Well, I took the point for the reason I'm coming to. At the end, I was defeated. I wanted a different strategy. I was defeated. But Jim Callaghan, when he announced the decision, said, we discussed it in the cabinet, we considered alternatives, but this is what we decided. So I was able to say afterwards, well, this is the government decision. I don't mind being committed by the government decision. Don't ask me to pretend that I supported it all along. And that's a very important...
Circulated the 1931 minutes?
Pardon?
Was that the cabinet meeting when you circulated the minutes of the 1931?
Well, I did circulate the 1931 minutes, and it did annoy Jim very much, but at the same time, it was use of history for contemporary purposes. And I think it's better to people feel their view is being put in the cabinet. This idea of the unanimous cabinet on everything, I don't believe it. Why is it pretended in order to get unity and prevent the Daily Mail from getting a headline? I don't know.